Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma did not disappoint in her first big assignment as the chairperson of the African Union Commission. She successfully steered the 20th summit of the African Union, which closed its doors in Addis Ababa last week. Major decisions touching on Africa's future were reached as the Commission began work on a grand strategy that will rekindle Africa's dreams and aspirations. In an exclusive interview with Talk Africa, Dr. Zuma speaks about Africa's rebirth within the context of the continent's liberation ideology, Pan-Africanism. But first, a look at the major decisions by heads of state that dominated the outcomes of the summit.
Strong decisions and declarations by heads of state on critical issues facing Africa marked the end of the 20th summit of the African Union in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital. The newly elected chairperson of the African Union, Ethiopia's Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn, expressed satisfaction with the active participation of all the leaders in the discussions on various issues of interest to the continent.
I am committed to working in close consultation and coordination with member states as well as the Commission and other organs to advance the objectives of our Union.
On refocusing the Economic Commission for Africa to support the transformation agenda of the African Union, the heads of state urged the Secretary-General of the United Nations to provide the required support to the ECA to enhance its work in accordance with Africa's priorities. They also created the Pan-African Intellectual Property Organization. To this end, the heads of state requested the Commission to convene a meeting of all stakeholders dealing with intellectual property in the implementation of the decision during the May 2013 summit.
Africa must accordingly use current growth trends as a platform for broad structural transformation. We must drive the process on the basis of our own vision and priorities. We must tell our own story, and this cannot be done if we do not generate our data and statistics.
On the coordination of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change and Africa's preparation for COP19, the leaders acknowledged the need to further refine and streamline the coordination mechanism. The African leaders also requested the AU Commission on International Law to examine the proposed establishment of an international constitutional court and make recommendations to the 22nd session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government. The Assembly requested the Commission to take the necessary steps towards the integration of the new Africa-Asia Strategic Partnership into the Africa Union's structures and processes. But Mali did prove to be a distraction, where the ongoing French-led AU-backed military intervention against Islamists in its north found its way to the top of the agenda of the Peace and Security Council meeting. Heads of state called for the early operationalization of the African Standby Force rapid deployment capability within the framework of the African Peace and Security Council architecture.
To this end, amongst other things that I think we should do, we must speed up the operationalization of the African Standby Force so that the continent has the capacity for rapid response when the situation requires. We acknowledge in this regard the contribution of the international community, in particular France, to the urgent need to restore the territorial integrity of Mali.
The Council now awaits a report to the Commission on progress made in the rapid operationalization of the African Standby Force and challenges that may be encountered.
I want to start with a look at the theme of this year's African Union Summit, the theme of Pan-Africanism, which is a core theme of the African Union now. But Pan-Africanism dates back many, many years. On what context is the African Union today in the 21st century embracing Pan-Africanism?
Well, I think the continent has not only embraced Pan-Africanism over the many decades, as you yourself say, it dates back almost into the last century. But it's been a thread that has seen us through most of our difficult days during our struggles. And in fact, it was that Pan-Africanism that led to the creation of the Organization of African Unity in 1963. And it was that Pan-Africanism that made all countries in Africa to take the liberation struggles as theirs, to ensure that the liberation movements were supported. That's why Kwame Nkrumah said that the independence of Ghana would be meaningless if the rest of the continent wasn't free. So it was that spirit. And we think at this juncture, where we are celebrating 50 years of our struggle, we need to rekindle and to make sure that that flame burns even more of Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance, because we think Africa's rebirth is long overdue. Africa has a very illustrious history of very prestigious civilization, old civilizations, and it was leading in many aspects, actually, in education, in architecture, which you can still see the monuments today. It was leading in women leadership, in commerce, with trading with the East. And of course, it had very advanced kingdoms, goldsmiths, beneficiating our gold, which we are not doing now. So that Africa, that great continent, we are saying it's time that it reclaims and restores its greatness.
You've asked member states, though, to take stock of the continent's achievements over the last 50 years and plan for the future. In your view, where is Africa today as you take up your mantle of chairperson of the African Union Commission?
I think Africa has advanced from, say, the 70s, the 80s, where it was even in the early 90s. We've seen in the last 2 decades a real growth of and spread of democracy across the continent. Most countries now have regular democratic elections. We've seen higher awareness of human rights observance, and we have seen the Africans wanting to make sure that we develop, we take a bigger part of the world trade. But at the moment, we are growing 5% on average. That's pretty good, taking into account the global economic crisis, financial crisis. But good as that may be, there is a structural problem of our economies because we are not manufacturing. Our proportion of manufactured goods in what we trade is very small. And so it's not sustainable to keep relying on raw materials. We need to make sure that we change the structures of our economy. We manufacture, we have value addition, we have a greater percentage of manufactured goods in our trade. It's also important that we build on the momentum that is there for infrastructure development, so that we are connected, so that we have energy, because we cannot industrialize without energy. It's very important. Telecommunication. It's good now that there are these undersea cables. So we need to make sure that it's not only the countries along the coast that benefit from broadband, but that is brought into the terrestrial countries.
The African Union is talking about the need for strategic partnerships. What are those partnerships?
Well, first, when we're talking about African trade, we must improve intra-African trade. Then we must also improve the proportion of global trade. When it comes to partnerships, Africa has traditional partnerships, has new strategic partnerships. If we look at the traditional partnerships, we've had a long-standing partnership with the EU, but we are now expanding our partnerships. We are having partnership with China, India, for instance, Korea, Turkey. But it's very important that those partnerships are such that there is mutual benefit, and also that those partnerships should assist us in what we're trying to do, to industrialize, to fight with underdevelopment. Because over many years, Africa has been underdeveloped. We now want to develop. But we are also saying we cannot rely only on partners to develop Africa. We're saying that the mainstay of development should be continental. The partners should assist us, but we must take charge of that development. And it's very important that we do that, because even now, when you look at the infrastructure that is there and that is ongoing, most of it comes from national budgets. Yes, there is a proportion that comes from outside, but still the bigger proportion comes from national. And so where we wait in terms of infrastructure only for outside help, it takes very long to come. But if we start, then it also encourages the partners to then pitch in. And the other thing that we need to really look at is developing our human resources. Because whether you want to mine, whether you want to add value to your raw materials, whether you want to increase agricultural production, whether you want to innovate, the thread that runs through that you need are human beings. And therefore, human development is very essential. Health, education, not only primary, but higher education, which can then feed the institutions of higher learning, universities. You know, one of the statutes that was approved was a Pan-African University Statutes. And because Africa wants to get into science and technology, want to get into innovation, so we're starting this Pan-African University, which will start up with 5 campuses, and we hope it will grow and eventually have more than 50 campuses.
Pan-Africanism, it seems, is back, and it is reloaded. Its re-emergence has been hailed as quite timely. Quite appropriately, the 20th Summit of the African Union, which concluded in Addis Ababa last week, picked Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance as its theme. Shortly, champagne corks will pop up and celebrations will follow to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Pan-Africanism and the founding of the Organization of the African Union, which is today known as the African Union. Simply put, there's no denying Africa her rebirth.
This year is special, for we will be commemorating the 50th anniversary of the founding of our continental organization, the OAU, and hence the theme, Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance.
But what exactly is Pan-Africanism? For most of Africa's post-independence generation, Pan-Africanism, the all-powerful movement that championed Africa's liberation struggle, may not ring a bell. In the last 5 decades, Pan-Africanism has encouraged the solidarity of the African people worldwide. It is based on the belief that unity is vital to economic, social and political progress and aims to unify and uplift people of African descent. As an ideology, Pan-Africanism asserts that the fates of all African peoples and countries are intertwined, It is built on the principle that African peoples, both on the continent and in the diaspora, share not merely a common history, but a common destiny. Pan-Africanism stresses a need for collective self-reliance. Kwame Nkrumah, the founding father of Pan-Africanism, and its advocates such as Muammar Gaddafi, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X and W.E.B. Du Bois all postulated that solidarity would enable the African people to achieve self-reliance. Solidarity, they argued, would allow the continent's potential to independently provide for its people's needs to be fulfilled.
There is a new African in the world. That new African is ready to fight his own battle and show that after all, the black man is capable of managing his own affairs.
So then, here we are, sitting on the eve of a new dawn today. Can Pan-Africanism propel Africa to achieve her long-cherished dream of becoming a global economic powerhouse?
Make major investments in China.
In child privacy. Why we are living for.
That's a fundamental government
Position on China's
by leaders.
I think that's for that would be have a dialogue, political change and human rights.
Don't you think you
change human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter. Culture Express. See the world in color.
When we look at where Africa is today, there's talk of Africa rising. You've talked about, on average, economic growth being at 5% despite the global economic crisis. But there is also re-emergence on the other side, re-emergence of conflict on the continent. Let's take a look at Mali. What is your assessment of what's going on in Mali on the ground at the moment?
Yes, I think Mali is a problem that we have to resolve. What's going on is that part of Mali's territory was taken over by fundamentalist groups, narcotic groups, terrorists. It's a combination of all sorts of groupings who have taken over the northern part of Mali's territory. And of course, whilst that was happening, there was also an unconstitutional change of government. But what is happening in Mali can happen in any country. And that's why it's very important for the continent and the international community. And I was very happy to see that the international community and the continent are speaking in one voice in what needs to be done in Mali in order to help the Malians to regain their territorial integrity and to restore their constitutional government as well, go back to an elected government, a republic, a secular state, which they had, a democratic state. So, but there are different elements. There's the element of narco trade, there's arms trade, there's human rights trafficking. So there's lots of criminality as well, hostage taking, and we need all the support as Africans to deal with it. But I don't think we should take Mali, the situation in Mali, as now the definition of the continent. It's one area, Mali and the Sahelian region, and Africa is busy trying to deal with it. But the rest of the continent is stable. I would say about 90% of the continent is stable, and what it needs is development. And then those areas where there's conflict of one form or another, we need to attend to them because they can't have development if there's conflict. But there will be conflict if there's no development. So the two must be seen to go together. And of course, inclusive democratic governments, equitable distribution of wealth. And we need to also look at the root causes of these conflicts so that we don't always deal with the symptoms. We can look at deeper and see what are the root causes and see how we can deal with them. But it's important to isolate the areas where there are conflicts and deal with them and not define the whole continent as though the whole continent was in one big conflict.
What happened in Mali, in your words, can happen to any other country. Does Africa, though, have the capacity, the capability to act decisively when such a situation arises?
I think Africa should develop that capacity. There was a decision taken some time back to have a standby force, and it was agreed that it would be operational in 2015. But clearly, that time is too long. We need to accelerate and fast track. Instead of 2015, we need to bring it closer so that we can develop a quick response capacity so that even if there is need to be assisted, we should be assisted, but being there on the ground ourselves. So I think Mali has shown that we need to accelerate that. Decision was taken a long time ago, and now there is a real need to look at it and make sure that it's strengthened, that mechanism is brought into operation, but also strengthened, and countries contribute what they can, what they have, so that we really can have this way of having a quick response.
Africa and the international community have come up to assist in the Mali situation. There was a donor conference to raise funds for the Malians. Did that live up to your expectations?
Yes, I think it was good because there were pledges for AFISMA, the contingents that's going to be on the ground. There were pledges for assisting to build the Malian forces themselves. The pledges were in cash, and I think we got up to 455 million. But there were also lots of pledges that were in kind, like people going to train, going to supply ambulance kits and so on, but also people who were going to, one of the African countries said they will supply fuel for transport for the troops in Mali. So yes, I think we did pretty well. But of course, like anything else, it's as good as the delivery of those pledges. So we are very grateful for the pledges, but now the pledges must be made real so that indeed we can do the work that needs to be done pretty soon and urgently. The forces are already on the ground, and they are increasingly on the ground. There's deployment ongoing. So it's important that those pledges are made real soon.
What is the African Union's post-conflict strategy, though, for Mali? I mean, once the military intervention is over, what next for Mali? What is the roadmap?
Well, the Malians have developed their roadmap, but maybe just broadly, it's clear that there would have to be an election. The president did announce that if all goes well, they'll have their elections around June, July. And of course, there's a need for the country's own dialogue and also respect for human rights, no abuse of human rights for any reason. So I think we should assist them to also implement their own roadmap. whilst the military is there, there is a lot that needs to be done by the Malians themselves, besides building their defense and security forces. There is a lot that they need to do, including preparing for elections.
I want to turn your attention to Somalia. Somalia was Africa's history last year. They had a historic election. They have turned around. What do you see as the challenges still left for Somalia, and do you see the need for a prolonged AMISOM force there?
Well, I think we must really pay tribute to AMISOM forces there. I think everybody had given up on Somalia. The African troops made great sacrifices to bring Somalia where it is. Of course, having support from the international community and from the United Nations. I think it's important to support the government of Somalia whilst it increases its authority until it can have authority in the whole territory. It's also important to support them whilst they begin to deliver services to their people. It's important to support them whilst they are building their institutions so that in the end they can have strong institutions, they can have authority over the territory and begin to show the people that the dividend for peace, the peace dividend. So it's important to support them, not just to pull out abruptly.
Moving forward, though, with the African Union, what are going to be your priorities?
Well, as you know, our priority going forward in this year in particular is to look at our 50th anniversary, to make sure that we have a solid framework going forward. We, as the Commission, are dealing with our strategic plan for 2014-2017. That's ongoing. We should be done by March. But the AU has also been asked, the Commission has been asked to develop an AU-wide strategic plan. But we thought maybe it won't be quite a strategic plan, it would be a framework. And that's what we are developing. And that's what is going to guide us in the next coming decades. And we are going to be consulting widely, not only in government, but beyond government, because if it's an AU framework, surely it must involve also all the sectors of our population. So for this year, that's the main thing. And of course the celebrations. But the priorities going forward are going to be contained also in that framework.
All right, finally, Madam Chairperson, what would you like to say to Africa? What is your message for Africa?
For me, Africa is capable of its regeneration. It's capable of its renaissance. And I think it's possible. And I want to just say to all Africans, it's possible to create a prosperous Africa at peace with itself. And we should be able to achieve that in 50 years, if not earlier. But we must all individually and collectively work towards that, a prosperous Africa at peace with itself. And if we all change our mindset and say it's possible, and we focus on that, it's going to happen, and Africa will be great again.
Madam Chairperson, thank you very much.